Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for a conversation with the president and CEO of one of Milwaukee's incredible museums, the American Black Holocaust Museum. I'm Jenny Toutant, the Interim Chief Engagement and Education Officer. Dr. Burt, can you please introduce yourself and tell us a bit more about the museum and its mission?
So, good afternoon, Jenny. It was good having a pre-recording conversation with you, understanding some of your origins and just talking about the museum. So, my name is Dr. Robert Davis. Everyone calls me Burt or Dr. Burt. And I have just come back to Milwaukee about a year ago, a couple of weeks ago, to serve as America's Black Holocaust Museum's new president and CEO. My mission is to reopen the museum in the spirit and the legacy of Dr. James Cameron, who is our founder. The museum officially opened in this present location around 1988, but he was displaying artifacts and stories and books in his home in several locations starting as early as 1984. So the mission of the museum, and I'm not going to quote it, quote unquote, you can go to our website, abhmuseum.org, is really to create a general awareness, but also to promote an educational setting where we open our minds and our hearts and our spirits to the effects of slavery and Jim Crow and what it has done to us as Americans, but then to also promote racial and social repair and reconciliation. And on the other side of that, creating a common existence for all of us as Americans. And we are and have been constructing these educational vignettes and experiences through the eyes and ears and the lenses and the spirit of African Americans.
Fantastic. We had the wonderful opportunity to host a couple of our August Wilson monologue competition workshops with teenagers in the museum's new space as you continued construction last fall. The layout of the museum and space is such a historical gem and resource for Milwaukee. Can you tell us about a little bit more about that space, when it's set to reopen, and just all of those details?
So I'm going to try to go back and be as succinct because I know we have to deal with a time crunch, but I want to give it some context. So the museum is located on the corner of Bell Phillips and North Avenue. But if you look in the context of North Avenue down to Garfield along Bell Phillips, there's a historic school there, Garfield School, and then an extension to the south, and then the new development to the north. There were two individuals, two African-American women, Alderwoman Malele Cox and a developer, Melissa Goins, who were instrumental in developing that block. And I want to put it in the context of, they just didn't develop spaces, they developed a block. And out of that development, they both swore that after the museum closed in 2008, because of the fact that Dr. Cameron passed away and we were going through a recession, that we would reinvigorate that space to incorporate a new museum of some existence. So that's how it started. So now we have this physical space that is basically aligned with where, or kind of next door to where the original space was. And a little less than 10,000 square feet. Kudos to my predecessor and now executive consultant, Brad Pruitt, who with a team of volunteers led the effort to make sure that the physical space was never going to die. And through generous contributions that was led, by the way, by our ex-county executive, Chris Abley, who created this challenge grant of $100,000. We created a legacy foundation through our board, which was led by Ralph Holman, to match the $100,000 gift. And that then catapulted the museum to raising substantial funding, which brought me on which lured me back, but not because of the funding, but because of the mission.
Right.
And and as I alluded to you before, I'm a veterinarian by training. I've worked in zoos and aquariums all my life, professionally. When I learned of Dr. Cameron and I learned of his legacy and I learned of the necessity to bring this back, I was compelled by two factors. One, I love Milwaukee. And number two, we need to bring this back, most especially because of the characterization of what Milwaukee is now as being the most racially segregated city in the United States.
Yeah. So you, in between having the years between having the physical space from when it closed in 2008 to present day, you've had a virtual museum as well.
Yes.
Is the plan to still keep that virtual space going? How are they intersecting with one another?
Well, we find ourselves in an extraordinarily unique position. Brad, along with several other community leaders, Frank Kaplan and Reggie Jackson, promoted the idea of creating this virtual museum. Normally, it's a situation where you have the physical space and then you create this kind of virtual presence. This is actually one of the situations where physical space disappeared. They created this virtual presence back in 2010. They started, it emerged and launched in 2012. We just had a relaunch last month. There's over 3,300 pages of content. We reach over 2 million visitors a year, over 200 countries. And curriculums have been developed because of the content. We find ourselves in, once again, as I said, a unique position because we actually have the opportunity to have a virtual presence that literally is more enriched than the physical presence right now. And so our challenge is to determine how we best complement each other, how they kind of interdigitate so that the physical space leads you to the virtual space and the virtual space leads you back to the physical space. I don't think it's going to be difficult, but one of the things that I do know and that we've kind of confirmed because of the relationships that I have with people that are in zoos and aquariums and museums all over the country, if not the world, is that we have this very unique situation where we have both these presents in an abundant situation where we can actually drive one to the other in a situation where most museums don't have that capacity. They don't have that bandwidth.
Right. That's so exciting too. And particularly right now with COVID-19,
Exactly.
having that virtual presence is such an important way to be able to reach out to the community.
It's once again, and I said this earlier, this tragedy of COVID-19 and the social and civil unrest has actually created a scenario for the museum and the virtual museum to best position ourselves with the strengths that we've been endowed with. And so the virtual museum has this ability to reach people already. It's been doing it for years. And now, because of the true nature of why the museum was founded by Dr. Cameron as one of the only living survivors of a lynching, and then the only person to write a book about it, and then to found a museum about it. So we are best equipped to actually be involved with being conveners of this dialogue around how we change our mindsets and our behaviors as human beings and as Americans, and how we coexist in the United States.
Wow. So I want to dig into that a little bit here. I hear a lot of folks, in the community, or in the news, talking about the uprising of the civil rights movement currently, reminding them of the civil rights movement in the 1960s. And, how do you think that current events impact your work as a museum then? How does that examination of our American history inform what you do today?
So there's an old saying, old cliche: if you don't study your history, you're doomed to repeat it. Right? We've heard that again and again and again. The thing about Dr. Cameron, as well as other visionaries like him, was that they were able to understand that our history profoundly informs our present and our future. And so, can you imagine that in 2020, we have more racially driven hatred groups than we've had in the history of this country? And let's be clear, they started this resurgence after President Barack Obama became president in 2008. And that all of the things that we are witnessing now have been going on secretly, secondarily, or blatantly for all of this time since Jim Crow. And so many of us became complacent, many of us, with the fact that America's changing. The world is changing. But there are still underlying factors around the founding of this country, the founding of the Confederacy. And so the relevance of this museum is to be mindful of being factual, being instructive, being inclusive, being experiential, but also being a convener of conversations, interjections, dialogues, mutual experiences that say, hey, how do we become better because and beyond of this? And so one of our mantras is not how do we get through COVID-19, how do we become better because of what has happened? Because it's happened, it's happening.
Right.
And so the same thing goes with everything else that's going on in the United States now. How do we become better? What it is, what we see, how it's presented, it is. If you open your eyes, if you open your hearts, if you open your mind, you will see that America is in a crisis. And beyond a pandemic, economic, but a socially driven civil rights crisis. And the museum is best poised to become a leader or continue its leadership position in not being politically driven. We're not an advocacy group, but we are an educational facility. We are a museum. We are collectors of artifacts. And then we provide these experiences, these vignettes of experiences that we curate to create discussion. Ultimately, what we want is social change, positive social change. Not one race over the other, one ethnicity over the other, one gender over the other. We believe firmly in diversity, equity, accessibility, and inclusion. And so our mantra is, why don't we best position ourselves structurally, financially, physically, and virtually to be best poised to help America and the world? Because as you said and alluded to, because of COVID-19, we shall not fool ourselves to think that we're going to have the physical visitation that we would have expected for years.
Right.
but we can have the virtual presentation and penetration into these audiences who are looking to us and looking for us for leadership in this space.
Wow. It's a lot. It's inspiring the work that you are doing. So thank you so much for sharing it with us today. How can folks that are listening support the work that you are doing?
So if you go to, if you just type in or Google America's Black Holocaust Museum, you can go to our virtual museum. If you go to abhmuseum.org, you can do that. So before I say what most people are thinking I'm going to say as a nonprofit, I'm going to say this, and then I'm going to say that. Go to the website, do some history about Dr. Cameron. He was an extraordinarily gifted and visionary human being. Then peruse, and peruse, people normally think that peruse means to lightly view. Peruse by definition means to really dig in deep, to read profoundly, experientially. Look at our history, read our history. And then if you're compelled to join us and support us in reopening our museum and expanding our vision, please hit the donate button. It's right there, and we would appreciate your support. And sign up for our newsletter so that you can stay informed of what we're doing. And then finally, if you have the ability, when we do decide to open our doors, I'm personally extending an invitation for you to be there for our inaugural event, which will be spectacular.
I can't wait. One last question to close out our conversation today. If you had one wish for Milwaukee, what would it be?
Really? I get one wish. Okay. Oh, wow. Equality. If I had one wish, it would be equality, and then parenthetically, through education, socioeconomic development, the arts, health, mental health, wealth, it would be equality. Access for everybody in Milwaukee to have the opportunity to be their best individuals within this collective.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for your time, Dr. Burt, and for all of the work that you are doing to create positive change in Milwaukee. We really appreciate you.
Thank you, Jenny. It was a wonderful time talking to you pre-taping, and let's keep in touch and let Sydney know how we can continue to work with you. As we talked earlier, she is a huge fan of yours. And August Wilson, actually, quite frankly, is one of my favorites as well. So
wonderful.
If there's any, I don't have to say if, there will be multiple collaborations with us for many years to come. Thank you so much for this opportunity to share our vision and our mission.
Of course, and thank you for sharing it.